Welcome back, everybody. It's Han Talks First. It's a brand new episode, and we're joined by a veteran of Han Talks First. He was on episode 2 a long time ago, back in season 1, a long time ago in a podcast far, far away. But this is the podcast you're looking for, Han Talks First. I'm your host, Han. And today we are not only going to talk about the title of today's podcast, which is What Does It Mean to Be a Jedi? But we're also celebrating the 40th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back. And my guest today is Zach Valadon. Zach, tell everyone about who you are, what you do, and about your love for Star Wars. Let's hear it.
Well, hello, my good sir. Thank you for having me back. The last time we did this, I was able to come to your place, and we were able to do it in person. And sadly,
Yes.
amidst not only the COVID-19 crisis, but also the fact that I live 1,000 miles away now, um, double. We're not able to do that. But thanks to the power of the internet, here I am coming at you live.
Extreme social distancing. Sorry, go ahead.
Extreme social distancing.
He actually lives next door.
We're just being extra cautious. The force guided me here today.
Mm.
But yeah, man, I'm glad to be back. And like you said, I'm Zach Valadon. I've been making music with you for a few years now.
Yeah.
I've been talking Star Wars and sharing our love of Star Wars with you for a few years now. And I mean, what's there to say? It's been a part of me since I was a child. And, you know, growing up, I had really cool relatives that were big Star Wars geeks, and they got me into the original trilogy. And it just so happened that our childhoods coincided with the release of the prequel films, which I hold near and dear to my heart. Though
Right there with
for
you.
some strange reason, not quite as much as the OT. There's something about the original trilogy that has its own magic that is separate and in my mind at least a little greater. But yeah, I used to, you know, jump around in front of the TV with my toy lightsaber and pretend I was Luke or Anakin and have a great time. And it's some of the fond memories that I have of a childhood, which is escaping me rapidly with each passing day.
I think
And
last we were talking about as a kid, like trying to change the channels on the TV with using the Force or something like that. Like that
yes,
we talked about.
the one that stands out to me now that you mention it is like when I would go to the grocery store with my grandma as a kid. I used to love imagining that, like, when people walked through the door, I'd hold my hand out.
That was it.
And
That's it.
that's yeah, that's the standout thing for me. And man, do I miss that.
Me too. Zach is also a fellow podcaster. Tell everyone
Oh,
about your
yes.
podcast.
Yes, I host a podcast called The Pen, the Sword, and usually it'd probably be about once a month to once a week at most. But with the coronavirus happening, I've got nothing to do but talk to interesting people. And the goal of The Pen, the Sword with Zach Valadon is to talk with creative people about, what it is that they do, which is creating and the philosophy behind it. And in fact, I believe you're going to be a guest shortly as well. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm excited.
Me too.
So last time we talked about the top 10 most iconic moments in Star Wars. So we were talking about what we both think makes Star Wars iconic. Mostly last time. I want to know, you know, it's been a year since we last podcasted. Has anything changed for you, especially with things like The Rise of Skywalker, The Mandalorian, some of the animated stuff, just a bunch of new toys, etc.? Has anything changed for you for like iconic moments?
Interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I loved The Rise of Skywalker, and
I
I
did too.
think I'm okay. Good. I'm glad. I know
Loved
that
it.
we
Loved
discussed
it.
that before. Yeah, it was phenomenal. And if there are moments from that movie that I would throw in there, I mean, it was such an emotional movie. I can't think of another Star Wars movie where I cried as much in the theater. That they pulled together so many things so nicely. But the one thing that stands out to me probably the most is the rise of Ben Solo, as it were, the rise of Skywalker. There at the end, him just completely demolishing the Knights of Ren and then him standing alongside Rey and facing down the Emperor was just such a cool moment. And it's such a grandiose scene too. I mean, like, I know a lot of people hated it, and that, as is wont to happen with the sequel trilogy, I'm an apologist for it, you know that.
Mhm.
But that, I mean, that was like it was like a bread and butter, like everything came together for me and I loved it moment. So I would add it in there somewhere, but the thing about the Rise of Skywalker for me is that there weren't these like anthemic moments in it. I think that
Yeah,
I like. It's just such a great slow burn of a. I mean, it's not a slow burn; it's a very fast
it's
paced
very
movie, but
fast burn.
it's a very. But it like it's like boom. There's so much to say and so much to see, but it pulls together everything from the sequel trilogy very nicely, and I think that is the power of that film, versus, in the Phantom Menace, when I'm watching it, I'm waiting for two things, and one is pod racing and the other is the Duel of the Fates.
Oh yeah,
And while I love that movie, those are, I'm not at the edge of my seat except for those scenes.
yeah. For me, definitely emotional watching it. I think the most worked up I got, or choked up that I got, was when the sequence of um, Rey and Kylo fighting on the Death Star, and intercut with Leia, then Leia passing away, and Han Solo, up until the point where Chewie finds out that Leia passed away. That was a
Yes. Oh,
moment
that gave me
on
chills when you said that.
it was very powerful, and that to me is my favorite part of the movie. That whole sequence of events. And I think that
Yeah.
was just very powerful, very emotionally told. Um, what were what was your favorite part of the movie? I guess.
Of the Rise of, it's funny, I was just watching it again the other day. That's one of my favorite parts is definitely the sequence where Han Solo comes back,
Hmm.
and is obviously a memory of Ben's. But I mean, man, Adam Driver as Kylo Ren is um almost without a doubt my favorite Star Wars villain now. Without question, actually, Kylo Ren is my favorite villain.
Oh wow,
and and to have him, mirror that scene on the bridge in The Force Awakens was just
it was
super
beautiful.
powerful. Yeah, it was beautiful. And I loved, speaking of The Mandalorian, they dropped that episode 2 days early that week so that we could see that force
Yeah, that's
healing
right.
was going to play a huge part in this movie, and that was pretty awesome. And to see them, continue to do that throughout the movie, and even kind of call back to the Force Awakens. I'm sorry, the Last Jedi, with, the effort of certain Force activities, just literally expending all of the energy from your body was incredible. I mean, man, it's really that third act. It's like Rogue One, man. The third act is just the money shot.
Exactly. So, who was your favorite villain prior to Kylo?
Darth Vader for sure.
Of
Um,
course.
Yeah, Vader was incredible, but Kylo Ren, as a person that can take off the mask and exhibit emotion, and probably I will give some credit to the naysayers of the sequel trilogy. He has the most clear exhibition of a storyline and also emotion, and he's captivating in a way that some other characters aren't. Not to say that I don't like those characters. I mean, I love Rey, but I don't think we get as much out of her as we get out of Kylo. I mean, he's already installed in the series. His lineage is the very fabric of the narrative of Star Wars. And Rey is, no less important to this trilogy, but she is, we have less time to get acquainted with her and develop an emotional connection with who she serves in the series. And I mean, obviously we find out at the end that also a part of the universe that we've grown to love over time. But man, Kylo Ren just stole the show. I'm a huge Adam Driver fan in general. I loved A Marriage Story.
Oh, I did too.
Um,
It was great.
yeah. Oh, so good. Him and
Surprisingly
Scarlett
funny
Johansson.
and charming way, you
Yeah.
know,
Oh, and then broke me at the end in a similar way that La La Land broke me at the end.
of what Marriage Story?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot, it's funny because I was having a bad day when I watched it, and I had been meaning to, but it's a long movie.
Yeah.
And I Googled, I was like, what uplifting things can I watch on Netflix? And it said A Marriage Story. And I said, I didn't get that sense from the trailer, but
Right.
okay. So I watched it. And at the end of it, I was like, that was not uplifting at all. Not even a little bit. And I was like texting people and they were like, man, that was a great movie. I felt inspired at the end. I was like, you must have lived in a family to which that didn't happen.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's all the experience. Dude, so it's funny to hear actually hold on one second. I'm having an audio problem.
Okay.
Can you hear it on your end? It's like clipping.
No, I'm not
Check,
hearing.
check, check, check.
If you're hearing me, let me try to turn my mic down a little bit. Does this help?
Hello, 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 hello.
Hello.
I think it's gone. It may have been just like temporary.
Okay. I turned my my knob here down on my interface, so hopefully that helped a little
You
bit.
touching your knob?
Touching my knob live on the air.
Okay. Don't worry, that won't be in in the episode.
You can put it in. We got nothing. What are people doing right now but having time?
Very true. You know, all those memes where it's like, how many times have you whacked it today during quarantine? And then
Oh, 17. That's not even being generous.
I don't even have a dick anymore. Okay. So I was going to say, what I find is very interesting. Last week, and this is to like hearing what your thoughts are on The Rise of Skywalker. Last week, I had a guest on. His name's Brian Kessinger. And you probably don't know him, but he's actually an illustrator, author, storyboard creator for Lucasfilm, actually, and
Oh,
Marvel.
wow, incredible.
Yeah, and we had a lot of great things to talk about with this like art and stuff. But he was also mentioning his thoughts on like the sequel trilogy as a whole. He too loved The Rise of Skywalker. I got from him that The Last Jedi was his favorite out of the three. But the way he talked about them as a whole was like, it's kind of like each one is almost an interpretation, a different interpretation of a Star Wars story, if that makes
Mm,
sense. And I thought it was an interesting way to look at it. And I think the reason why it feels that way is the connectivity of it all. While in some ways it doesn't really connect well, but in other ways, in finer, more detailed ways, it does connect very well. And I think it's notable to point out the details in these movies, specifically Rise of Skywalker, as small as the paint job on some of the creatures to as big as Rey's outfit choice. I don't know. It
mm-hmm.
all is so specific, and there's so many different factions of people working on this movie that have like a specific job. Like one person's in charge of like making sure Rey's bun is just like it was in the last frame, stuff like that. And that's what I
That's
love about
incredible.
these movies. Just that they're I mean, yeah, it's the big production and everything, the budget to be able to afford to do that, but there's a lot of heart in all these movies, and I saw it a lot in The Rise of Skywalker. And
Yeah.
um, I actually enjoyed how I did enjoy the Palpatine reveal of Rey being a Palpatine, and I thought it really complemented the fact that these movies are about the ultimate good versus the ultimate evil, Palpatine versus Skywalker, symbolically speaking.
Right.
And while I still would have loved if she turned out to just be a nobody, I think it could have gone either way. You know, I mean, if it would tell a different story and the nobody, if she was a nobody situation, it would be that, you know, well, it doesn't matter if you're related to anybody to become something or etc. You know,
Right.
nepotism, like that kind of idea. And but with having her be a Palpatine, it's overcoming whatever background you come from. So it's weird how
Yeah.
it could have gone either way. What was your thoughts on it being the Palpatine? Because I know you loved the fact that she was Rey from nowhere, you know?
Yeah. You know, I feel largely like you do. It could have gone either way for me. Um, I was a little disheartened at first, you know, because I had heard rumors of it beforehand, and I was trying so hard to stay unspoiled. Um, but you know, it happened. Obviously, we got a lot of content before the drop of this movie, thanks to somebody at the outlet. I think that comes with bringing so many people on board to do little things that get
Hard to keep it
purview over
straight.
some of the big things. Yeah. Um, One of my favorite things in The Last Jedi, and I think it will serve kind of my idea about this, was the idea that the Force flows through everybody, um, and and that people can tap into it. I loved the end of The Last Jedi with Broom Boy, because for me that was symbolic of all of us as kids with wide-eyed imaginations, looking out into the sky after watching a Star Wars movie and feeling like you could tap into the Force. And that's the magic of the series for me, and that is what I loved about what they were doing with that. And retconning the midichlorian thing and everything, um which I was fine with anyway. I thought that was probably my least favorite and underdeveloped part of the prequel trilogy.
So I'm
um I,
curious, is The Last Jedi still considered your favorite? Because last we spoke on the podcast, it was your favorite at that time.
I like Rise of Skywalker more, but it's now a second.
Oh,
The
okay,
the
interesting.
Last Jedi, yeah, the Last Jedi second to Rise of Skywalker. And I think large. I had seen people have pointed out a few things about. I'm big on the Star Wars combat, and so I was, if anything, like I loved the Last Jedi as a story. I tended to disagree with mostly everybody about what had become of Luke, um, and just because I felt like it was a very natural character development and something that I think they hit us with a curveball.
Definitely.
And I liked it. I liked the idea that even the Star Wars universe's greatest hero could be a fallible human like me, and it made me connect with Luke in ways. I'm prone to wanting to withdraw within myself and be separate from everybody when I feel like I don't deserve to be, a part of the bigger story on Earth. Um, so I totally got him from that perspective. Um, but the Rise of Skywalker, I mean, had some of my favorite combat sequences. I mean, just thinking about like the duel that they had. I'm blanking on the name of the planet that they go to immediately before Exegol. Um,
Kashimi, right?
Kashimi, that's right. Yeah, where they're having the fight on the ruins of the old Death Star.
Oh, I'm
Um,
sorry. That I was thinking of the ice place.
oh,
Okay, you're talking about where the ex stormtroopers were.
that's right.
I don't remember the name of that
I
place.
don't remember the name of the planet there, but they have the duel after Kylo crushes the beacon.
Yeah,
I'm blanking on a bunch of terminology right now. I feel like a fake fan.
Wayfinder.
Wayfinder, Sith Wayfinder. That's right. Um,
The other cool fight of Rise of Skywalker was the one on Kachimi where it's intercut from the starship to the ground.
that's right. And he's down there wondering where she is, and then they crush the pedestal that Vader's helmet is on. Um,
Yeah, have you watched the behind the scenes of Rise of
I
Skywalker?
have not. I actually I mistake. So I haven't gotten my Blu-ray yet. It's on the way. Um,
Good.
but I also have not. When I purchased it on Amazon, I neglected to purchase the digital copy that had the bonus features. So I only got the
Oh
film,
no,
which I'm bummed about. But I've watched it 3 or 4 times now since I bought it
me
digitally
too.
because I have nothing but time.
Well, the documentary is fascinating. I don't think as good as the Last Jedi one, which I loved.
Oh
Um,
man, that one about Ryan Johnson.
it was a great documentary. Ha.
Yeah.
But in this one, that fight specifically, it shows that they actually built a set that was half and half, and the way they shot it made it look like it was going from the starship to the ice planet. But they built a set that way, that half of it was
Mm,
the land and half of it was a ship. It was really cool. So there's some
that's
shots.
crazy.
Yeah, there's some shots, and then I went back and watched the movie, and I saw there's some panning shots that go like this across, like from the ship into
To the planet.
and it was really cool to see how they made it practical, you know.
Yeah, and this is the planet where Poe used to run spice on.
You were a spice runner?
Yeah. How about that like half-assed relationship though that they they build between
With Zori?
and no, well Zori too, but well okay, here was one thing my uncle pointed out that I really liked a lot though, now that you mentioned Zori, and I don't want to forget it. You know, at the end when they're all celebrating down at
Yeah.
the resistance base and Poe lands and he like makes the eye at Zori
Yeah.
and she's like no, and I just thought that was funny because Poe's backstory is that he was conceived after the battle on Endor, after the celebration.
Oh,
It's built into one of the novels, and or maybe perhaps the comic series. But man, I'm so behind on all of kind of the extended stuff going on in media around it.
me too. But that's really cool. I didn't know
But
that.
yeah, and so it's kind of an homage to like he was like, I'm gonna get lucky right now,
And your uncle
and
pointed that out to you?
yeah, my uncle. No, you should have my uncle on here.
Yeah, all three of us should do it, man. Sometime.
Oh, it would be awesome. Yeah, we could zoom it in,
Wow.
zoom it up. But oh, dude, it was really funny to me after you pointed that out. Now I can't help but chuckle every time it happens. I mean, it was funny to begin with.
Right. What were you saying about Finn?
Oh, that yeah. So the relationship between Finn and Poe is like, you know, that everybody had been shipping them as kind of like they're like having a relationship, and they kind of, I feel like they kind of serve that a little bit in the Rise of Skywalker, but without actually like indicating towards it being an actuality.
Turn them into an
So
old married couple.
yeah, I mean they bickered like they were in a relationship, and it was cute, but it was also
Is
like
he in a bad mood? Always.
always.
That's one thing I do love about the Rise of Skywalker is the relationship between
You know
those
what you
three.
are? You're difficult. You're a difficult man. That you were saying, sorry, the relationship between who?
Between all three of them. I really love that in
Oh,
this
oh
movie.
yeah. Yeah, that dynamic was a lot of fun. I mean, and I mean, I really feel like they built the frustration in well. I mean, like they've inherited a resistance in shambles, and yeah, I think people point to the humor of these things as like not Star Warsian, but I just think it's great. I think they really brought a lot of humanity to you know, a series that exists in almost an unimaginable context. You know, it's not, doesn't follow objective correlative. You know, it's not a world that we could function in, but
Yeah,
they make it feel like there are people like us in this trilogy that exist much like us and behave like us, or could be like us.
I agree. I totally see that. Well, guys, like I said, on the 28th, today's the 27th, but on the 28th is the 40th year anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back. It is hard to believe that it's been 40 years. And we recently just had the Phantom Menace 20th anniversary. So I want to take some time today and just reflect on The Empire Strikes Back and talk about this amazing movie. And I guess, you know, not too deep diving or anything, but just like, let's just reminisce on how amazing it was, you know? Do you remember like have any early memories of watching that movie?
Yeah, man. I remember, I feel like I remember my first time watching Empire Strikes Back, or at least being cognizant of it. And like when Han opens up the Tauntaun on Hoth, I
Yeah.
remember being like, oh,
I,
but
I remember thinking that the insides looked like some kind of food. And I
yeah,
thought it was kind of appetizing in a weird
that's,
way.
that's an interesting take on it. I definitely wouldn't have gotten appetizing. I,
It looked like mac and cheese, right? Something like really puffy mac and
yeah,
cheese.
it had like something spilling, like some kind of tubular thing spilling out for sure.
Yeah.
A little red macaroni.
I was that kid.
Uh,
Got them open so we can eat them. Was
I
that
love
bad?
that. um, yeah, dude, I was just watching this video on YouTube yesterday there was this guy who gave this really eloquent and wonderful kind of analysis of the duel between Luke and Vader in Empire Strikes Back. And he kind of let it run, and he talked through everything and kind of, what he thought the psychology was between the two of them. And it was just, I mean, it added something to an already phenomenal scene. I mean, that's probably my favorite duel of that trilogy. And again, I'm big on the lightsaber fights. So
Yeah.
and for that to be, for Luke to be completely unschooled and untrained as of yet, or almost completely unschooled and untrained, warned against going and fighting, and being admonished to, let your friends die if you believe in the cause they're fighting for. And
Yeah.
but maybe that's not the best wisdom coming from Yoda, and I think it's a major development in Luke's character, going out there and seeing what he's up against, but also still being the good guy that he hasn't even grown into yet.
I think so too. And I like the phrase, the psychology of the movie. This is, it's essentially a big character analysis movie for each of the characters.
Mm,
And a lot of that does have to do with their psychology, which is very interesting to think about. Of course, in Vader and Luke, mainly, I think, but also on of a moral uh plane too, like with Yoda and all of his teachings to Luke. I remember as a kid listening to the Yoda and Luke scenes, and um grasping that information and kind of not cognizantly learning, but subconsciously I was taking that in. And I think to this day, every day since, I've kind of had that in the back of my head. I've lived my life with those those rules, and the way to like just be patient and
mm.
think of others, not be selfish. I could obviously work on that, but can always work on it. But I think that's my favorite part of The Empire Strikes Back, is just the stuff between Luke and Yoda. Uh, I don't know,
Yeah,
especially as a kid, having that cool little puppet that talks funny on
yeah,
there. And kind of going off topic, but when he into Return of the Jedi, when Yoda dies, that is the only earliest memory I have as a kid watching that movie and being like really sad. I think that's my first
mm.
memory, is when he died. I was just really sad. And
It's very easy to love.
I was asking my grandma, I was like, why does Yoda have to go? And like crying over it. But
Mine
yeah.
was when Charlotte died in Charlotte's Web.
Oh, you told me that before.
Oh, dude, I lost it.
You win.
But I feel you on that. And I also, one thing I was thinking about this the other day too, after watching that video. And I don't know if the guy addressed this, but I I think that Star Wars has always been really good about calling into question who's really the good guy and the bad guy here.
Yeah,
Um,
very true.
the prequel trilogy largely centers around have the Jedi lost their way. And they're by the third movie, they're not keepers of the peace, they're generals in the army defending the Republic. And maybe that was the right place for them to be, but clearly it ended up a certain way for them, which was in tatters and scattered about. And we now get amazing stories about people who survived the purge of the Jedi Order 66. But I think what I think is phenomenal is there's still an element of that in The Empire Strikes Back. When Luke goes to Dagobah, Yoda's initial reaction is to kind of fall on his old ways and go, nope, I can't train him, he's too old. And Obi-Wan shows up and is like, are you kidding me? What he's saying is if you recall, once so was I. um but what I think he's saying is, are you kidding me? Are we just going to stand back and let the Empire continue to run the galaxy through the dark side of the Force and not put any effort into restoring balance to the Force? Like, what are you thinking, old man? And it goes to show that you can live for 900 some odd years and not get it yet.
No, you're right. And while you were saying that, it made me think, because of the differences in what a Jedi is between prequel and um, original, trilogies is
Mm.
it kind of reminds me of, loosely, Old Testament versus New Testament, like ways of living. And but as
Mm.
far as like Jedi thinking, so I want to bring that up back up once we get into what it means to be a Jedi. And I think it's good we're talking about Empire Strikes Back too, because that's when we kind of really learn about the beginnings of a Jedi for Luke anyway, in that time period. But one thing I did want to ask you about Empire is a couple weeks ago I was talking on the podcast about, you know, if Empire Strikes Back came out, like premiered during my lifetime when I could be aware of it, like today, for
Mm.
example, and I watched the movie, I was wondering what would my reaction be to that. And I thought I would actually be kind of disappointed in the ending, since it's not
Mm.
necessarily it's kind of cuts off, it's a cliffhanger, obviously, and it ends right after that giant reveal, which is, if you think about it at the time, it's kind of out of nowhere, and it's like
Yeah, I
take the
think it
air
stole
out
the
of it.
breath of the world.
Exactly, yeah. And so I was thinking, I probably wouldn't care for it if that came out now. um One, because you don't know if it's going to get a sequel, and two, because there really wasn't that closure to an ending, or like, hey, this is where we're going next, etc. I don't know. What did you ever think about that? Like just the ending to it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I the the I am your father drop is very satisfying, and knowing it as a trilogy, of course, I think, if I had fair confidence that the Return of the Jedi was going to come, I'd be like, man, they really did it with this one. I can't wait to see how this ends. But yeah, I mean, I hadn't really ever considered that. That's actually an interesting take on it, and I think it may be. So let me ask you this then, with respect to that: does the way that the Rise of Skywalker tied things together make the Last Jedi a little bit better for you?
That's something I really haven't thought too much about offhand. Um, a little bit, maybe as
Mm-hmm.
far as Ray goes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Still not so much Luke. I don't know. I need to watch those back to back though. I haven't looked at Last Jedi
Yeah,
in a while, but a
it's a good
little bit.
idea. I should marathon this weekend. I think that's what I'll do.
I mean, we got the time.
Nothing but it. So yeah, I mean, if Empire came out now, that's interesting. Wow.
Wow.
What if Empire? Wow. What if Empire came out now? I mean, the first thing I noticed is that Luke just kissed his sister, or I should say, his sister kissed him, and
Yep.
that would be like a standout thing for me. That would have been hard to get over. I don't know why. It's not just because I grew up watching that over and over again, and I guess I've had years and years and years to get over it. But that would be like an immediate hang up.
Right.
No, I mean, Empire Strikes Back is, but it's definitely one of my favorite Star Wars movies. If I like, if when the sequel trilogy didn't exist, it was my favorite out of all of them.
Out of the six, the
Out of the
first six.
six,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's pretty great. So you're a sequel guy.
Yeah, I've become a big apologist of the sequel trilogy. I mean, I love what J.J. Abrams started. I loved the passion that Ryan Johnson brought in, and I thought J.J. came in and tied it up very nicely, and gave like one of the most riveting and fast paced and wonderful Star Wars movies that exists now.
I agree, dude. I agree. All right, everybody, we're going to move on to talking about the main topic today, which is, what does it mean to be a Jedi? This is something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, because I think it'd be very interesting to dive deep into, since there's so many different points of view. There's some different Jedi. There's so many different um, ways of thinking. There's so many different, even like force powers and um, fighting stances. We've talked a little bit about that in the past. Um, and so I want to start by reading an excerpt from the Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia, which is official canon, is written by Pablo Hidalgo, one of the leaders of
Master of
the
the canon.
yeah the of the Lucasfilm Story Group. Is that what they're called? Star Wars Story
I
Group,
think
something like that.
so. I know that Hidalgo himself is like the end all be all. Nothing enters canon with or without his permission.
He actually, this is just random fact. He actually posted um, a couple days ago on Twitter. He was saying how he was one of the first people to suggest that Rey be um, take on the name Skywalker at the end of the trilogy, not to be a Skywalker, but to take on the name. And he said it back in 2014 when they were developing The Force Awakens, which I thought was really cool that he had that
Whoa,
in mind way back then.
that's
All right.
phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah. So this is here's the book for all you looking
That's a
or
beautiful
watching on it.
book.
It's one of three. It's a beautiful saga of novels,
Might
encyclopedias,
have to
whatever.
pick that up. I can't believe I don't own that.
You should, man. It's very interesting. They literally have everything. They have like, if you pause any frame of like the original trilogy, for example, and you see like some random character in the background, they have a definition of what that guy is in here.
Who that is?
It's crazy. Okay, so this is what the Jedi Code is, according to today's canon. All right, so the basic tenets of the Jedi was the Jedi Code, which was based on writings of Jedi Master Udan Ur, some 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. And it says, there is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no death, there is no there is no death, there is the Force. A Jedi does not act for personal power or wealth, but seeks knowledge and enlightenment. A true Jedi never acts from hatred, anger, fear, or aggression, but acts when calm and at peace with the Force. So that was the official doctrine. Or I guess the code for the Jedi. It's what they followed during like the prequel era, anyway. And it sounds to me like when I hear that coming out of my mouth, it almost sounds like one of those ancient proverbs that you hear from like, I don't know, monks or something like that.
Yeah, it sounds
Just
like Eastern philosophy to me.
yeah, very heavy in like Buddhism and um, the Enlightenment stuff and kind of things like that. But overall, I take it as just kind of, you know, being very self-aware while at the same time, uh, not just being one with yourself, but being one with everything around you, even that which is non-biological, like non-living. And so when I hear that, I think of both the prequel era and the original trilogy era, and I guess a little bit of the sequel. But it's almost like I said earlier, those three trilogies. It's almost like it's a different interpretation of the meaning of that passage there. For what I mean is, for example, you mentioned earlier how the prequel trilogy was almost about how the Jedi had lost their way and they were blinded by their own hubris, and it caused Palpatine to emerge from within, and they were blinded, they couldn't see it, and that was also brought up in the Last Jedi too, when Luke was at the temple with Rey. And then when we go into the original trilogy, I like how you pointed out that Yoda was saying like, "Oh, I won't teach you; he's too old," or whatever, and that was kind of going back to the old ways. And then he realizes old ways are done. You got to do something new. So here's this new form of Jedi that we can continue on with. And
Right.
we'll talk a little bit more about like the different levels of Jedi, such as Padawan, Knight, Master, etc. But what are your thoughts after hearing that passage?
Yeah, I got a real sense of exactly what you said, which is that it sounds like something a monk might put on a, in a book that guides people to meditative bliss. And meditation is a huge part of the Jedi way as well. That's I love. I just got on board with the Jedi Fallen Order, um,
What do you think?
and I'm really enjoying it. I tend not to enjoy video games that are driven by get this thing and bring it to so and so, then do
Yeah.
this. And but I like it from the perspective of the narrative. The combat is a lot of fun. They throw you into some tough combat situations right off the bat, which I think is pretty fun. That's challenging. I don't necessarily. I'm not loving like the how everything's like every planet I'm gone to so far is like a puzzle I have to solve.
You don't
That
like that?
that feel Nah,
That
I'm
was
not
my
big on
favorite part, dude.
okay. Yeah, I'm not big on puzzles in video. I recognize like a lot of my friends are like, "Oh, you got to like play such a," and I'm playing it for the narrative. I almost want to feel immersed in a movie. And I noticed that this game actually has like a story mode option built in where like you're you could basically put the combat on like everything gets blocked. You like it's almost impossible that you'll die. You're just like going and hacking and slashing your way through this whole thing.
Yeah.
Um,
So you haven't finished.
uh, no, I literally just started it yesterday. I
Oh, okay.
just got
Wow.
a, I just got a PlayStation, so I'm like just freshly on board.
When you finish, oh, we got to talk because I have some thoughts on the ending.
Okay, yeah, I've had the ending a little bit spoiled for me.
Oh
Um,
no.
yeah, so I mean I know what happens insofar as like and spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't played, but I know that
Spoiler.
he destroys the holocron at
Hmm.
the end of it, and which I'm not bummed about. I like what I know about the dynamic between Seer and Trilla.
Hmm.
So I'm really looking forward to seeing how it plays out in the cinematics, which are lush and beautiful so far. Um, but that's actually on the topic of what we're talking about. Seer being cut off from the Force. Luke being cut off from the Force and kind of operating in their own way, um, under like I think under the a misguided understanding of what how being a Jedi is not necessarily being a part of the Force. Maz Kanata is a really good example of this. She seems to know the Force. She seems to understand it. It seems to guide some principles in her life, and she seems to be able to channel it in some ways as well. But that
Yeah.
doesn't make her a Jedi. And I think it is that hubris that you mentioned earlier. The way Jedi kind of maybe get tangled up in the philosophy that they utilize the Force for in their life, which isn't necessarily what the Force is. I think of the Force as is two sides of it: an aggressive and dark energy, and then a light and peaceful energy that couldn't exist without one or the other. Each other's existence is predicated on one another essentially, and I love that conceptually, but it's not always. Those two sides of the Force have not always been harnessed in the same way, and what it means to be a Jedi specifically is to follow a principle that guides you away from emotion, not to act on your emotions, and that tends, the emotion seems to be, at least in a negative way, is what characterizes use of the dark side of the Force. So it's through that philosophy that they intend to channel only the light side of the Force.
Right. Yeah.
But
So
there's a caveat in people like, sorry,
no, no.
like Mace Windu, whose fighting style is unique, and in his own way he channels dark side energy to be an aggressor in combat, which I think is really interesting because I think that goes against the philosophy of the Jedi, and yet here he sits as a high-ranking member of the Council, second, I think, only to Yoda.
That's actually exactly what I was going to bring up. Is the light and dark and defining a Jedi. Um, I did an episode um, a little while ago, maybe about 10 episodes ago. Guys, check it out. It's called Balance of the Force. Talk about what balance is and what it means. According to George Lucas, balance of the Force is a Jedi or anybody just following the light side of the Force. So completely negating anything that has to do with the dark side. That includes dark side powers, etc., whatever. And then the people that follow the light side are then considered a Jedi. But we have people like Mace Windu, who is considered a Jedi, and he taps into the dark side only specifically when he needs to use it, for example, going up against Palpatine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of weird how that makes sense, but at the same time the definition is you follow the light. So I definitely believe that a Jedi, it can be a person that just follows the light side, but I think also knowing and studying the ways of the dark side is just as beneficial. It's just how and what you use those powers and that studies for
The
is what
intention
makes you.
behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because you could be like a Palpatine and just use Force Lightning to, I don't know, fucking kill whoever you want to, or
Right.
you could be Mace Windu and only use that to reflect the lightning that's being hit on you. So I think that's interesting. I'm glad you brought up Mace Windu. He's my
Yeah.
favorite.
He is, aside from being Samuel L. Jackson, absolutely one. Is that his lightsaber
That's
up there?
his, yeah.
That's that's wonderful. That is
And
distinctly his too. I don't know how I didn't notice that.
right behind
uh,
it is the Black Series action figure too.
oh, that's you got an impressive collection there. I got all my pops in the other room. I should be in there recording. um, I yeah, and but I think it also serves to show that the concept of being a Jedi is man, or man and whatever creature took part in its ways. It's created by them. It is not indicative of what the Force is rather. It is merely a philosophy through which you approach the Force and allow yourself to feel the Force. It's principles that are not, obviously the light side users are what we regard as the good guys, and the dark side users are what we regard as the bad guys. Um, but you call into question, when the Jedi become huge. It seems, and I don't actually know a ton of the lore behind this, but it seems like they become large power players in a metropolitan planet on Coruscant in the prequel uh, series. They've become bloated. They enter war pretty willingly, and they become generals that fight in an army and try to hold on to the guiding uh, principles of peace that have built them into I hate to say it this way, the empire that the Jedi have become
Yeah,
by that time. But how do you do that in war? You don't.
right. Let me put a perspective on you. So, and the question being, do you have to be able to use the Force to be a Jedi? So imagine we live in our world. People have superpowers, and
Mm,
they go out and they fight crime, and that dubs them a superhero. Um, Yet we have law enforcement people who can also fight the crime, and they're also in a way a hero, but they lack the superpower, the ultimate punch, or the ability to fly, etc.
right.
But they're still a hero. Now, if you study the ways of the Jedi through meditation, being one with the universe, and you learn combat, like you can wield a lightsaber too, but you can't force pull, or you can't fly or jump around like Yoda. Are you still considered a Jedi or a hero in that way? Because I think so.
Yeah, that's so in the context of the narrative, I think the Jedi Order would not allow a non-force wielder in, which is interesting.
They would not. No.
Yeah, I think you could still adopt the principles and function as a Jedi would in society, or approach. I think it goes beyond. It's an interest. In our world, I think it goes beyond. Merely being a wielder of the Force and somebody who could, uh, you know, manipulate the force or allow the force to flow through them in a certain way. It's about the way you approach circumstances and scenarios in life, which is more often than not what we're seeing, people go through as Jedi in these movies. They're having to face large issues that are bigger than them, and it's not, obviously they're the ones that are going and engaging in combat and fighting, and part of being a Jedi that can fight is that you can see things coming at you that you wouldn't otherwise. I think that's a huge tenet of prequel, at least the prequel series fighting, is
Definitely.
that it's so acrobatic and crazy and things are coming at you, but you have this innate sense to know what's going to come so that you can place your blade in its path and block it, and then you're just basically trying to get ahead of their senses.
And that's the point of view of, um, put it in music terms, for example, we're both musicians. Um, if I, however, never played an instrument in my life, but I went to school and I studied music theory, I could understand how music works. I can understand the theory of it. I'm a music theorist, but I don't play any instruments, never played an instrument in my life.
Mm.
And you're a musician. You play the music. You can also do the theory. You play many instruments, blah, blah, blah. I'm not considered a musician because I don't play anything. I'm a music theorist, essentially a critic almost. That could also be the argument of people that study the ways of the Jedi, but they can't use the Force, so they're just Jedi historians or theorists, as if that
It's
makes
kind of my
sense.
sense of Maz Kanata.
Yeah, I see her
Yeah.
as like the historian of Jedi practices and the ways. Like she says,
Right.
I've seen many forms of the Jedi in the past.
Yeah, she's been around a while and watched all this go down.
Oh, Maz gets around.
Clearly.
In every movie she talks about, like, where's my boyfriend with Chewie. I like that
Yeah.
Wookiee. And then
The man with the red plum bloom.
yes, he's like, oh yes, he can. Ma's a little hoe.
What does she call him? An artist with a blaster? What? Something to that effect. A poet with a blaster.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
oh, Maz.
Yeah.
She's also a
That's why she could.
sexologist.
I was gonna say she can't be a Jedi because she's so horny. The Jedi are forbidden to love. You know that.
That's okay. Let's talk about that too. The foreboding of attachment.
Mm.
How what I would think, if to be one with your surroundings and yourself, it would, like Anakin says, encourage you to love. I get not being attached and being at peace. For example, if somebody died, you don't want to
Mm.
hold on to that for the rest of your life and feel that sense of a deep, like, aggression or sadness. You want to be at peace with it and say, like, oh, they lived a great life, rest in peace, and just be like, I'm glad for the time we had with that person. And
Mm.
so that's kind of one way to take it, but to not have a physical relationship with somebody is a whole new level that I don't quite understand.
Have you ever read or are you familiar with Autobiography of a Yogi?
Yes, I wrote it. No, I
The
have
new
not read
incarnation of.
that.
So, and when you get out of home jail at the end of this pandemic, I encourage you to visit the Art of Living shrine in it's actually the Lake Shrine. It's located in Santa Monica, and it
Okay.
was established by a man named Paramahansa Yogananda, who is credited with bringing yoga to the Western world. He's an Indian, what they call a Swami, meaning guru, and he came to America in the early 1900s and started giving lectures. And he sort of set up base in California. And the Lake Shrine is probably the closest place you'll get that, well, at least that I've been, and I've been a few places, to feeling Jedi energy on this earth. And if you could read his book, I think you'll get a sense of Jedi philosophy in action, which is why I say it mirrors for me a lot of Eastern philosophy. traditionally speaking, gurus of the cut from the same cloth, they practice removing themselves from desire for the material good and being connected with the source, being connected with God or the creator, with what they regard as the creator. And that might not necessarily be like a Jesus or a an Abrahamic God as we know it, but they also give credit to those philosophies. According to Yogananda, Jesus Christ is tapped into the energy of the source and is merely an exhibition of that, and a drop of God consciousness on earth. And it's his, it's his separate. And I think it mirrors a lot of Christian philosophy as well. We're not supposed to get wrapped up in material goods according to that philosophy. We're supposed to be living in this world but not of the world. And that seems to be a major tenet of a lot of religious doctrines from around the world. And I think that is true of Jediism as a religion. If you practice attachment to people, if you have possessiveness over people, if you have possessiveness over things, you will have a tendency to act emotionally to protect those things. And and that may be kind of the fault of the Jedi for giving being an active part of the Republic, not existing as their own separate entity, and meditating and becoming closer with their source, the Force, and just being a part of that, and being diplomats of peace where it's applicable, or when it is, when the Force calls them to do so because they're in touch with it. They seem so integrated into the politics of it all. So much so that even in the first and second movies of the prequel trilogy, we're watching sort of diplomatic meetings happen where the Supreme Chancellor, not yet the Supreme Chancellor, I guess, is having conversations with Jedi about providing protection to another diplomat from another country or planet, as it were, protecting the Queen of Naboo, and keeping her safe, and in so doing playing an active role in the politics. And I think that is practicing attachment to the politics that are happening around them. And I think it's a major oversight on their part and part of their downfall.
That was very insightful.
Man.
Something about the origins of the word Jedi, you probably know, but for our listeners that don't know, it was derived from an old Japanese word, which I think, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but it sounded close to Jedi. And that was basically just of someone that has deep practices in being one with themselves. And what really made George Lucas use the term Jedi was from a book called The Princess of Mars, I think is what it's called. The movie version was called John Carter, which came out in 2012, I think. But
I did not know that any of this. This is
no?
incredible.
So
No.
a lot of the inspiration for the prequels came from this old book called The Princess from Mars. And John Carter was the ultimate adaptation of that book. And have you seen John Carter?
No.
So there's actually tons of similarities between both those movies as far as creatures, adventure, the hero's journey type storytelling. But in that movie or in that book, the people from Earth, when they go to Mars, they have like these superpowers because gravity acts differently. So they can
Right.
jump really high, they can hit really fast, have ultra strength essentially. And they were called Jedaks because
Oh.
on Mars they referred to Earth as Jeddah, Jeddah, and those from there was Jedaks, and they were all very, very Jedi-like. It takes place in a different type of world, and so that was the main influence that caused George to call them Jedi. And so
There's also a planet Jeddah in the Star Wars universe, is there not?
that sounds really familiar. Yes,
I think it's
no,
in Rogue One.
It's yeah, and it's also in The video game. What's it called? Fallen Order.
Oh, it is. I
No.
haven't gotten there yet,
Oh, okay.
but that's where they go. And they meet Chirrut Imwe.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I didn't catch that. There's another tie-in. Check out John Carter or the
I'm
book.
gonna. In fact, I'm just about to write that down because I've got to watch that.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I want to. We've talked for quite a long time. I want to kind of wrap up this talk about the different tiers: the Jedi Padawan,
Oh yeah.
Jedi Knight, Jedi Master, and also there's this thing called the Gray Jedi, which
Yes.
I'm sure you could enlighten me a lot about. But I guess we could kind of center this around the story of Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, if you don't mind. So,
Yeah.
a Padawan is a learner, and like we talked about earlier, for those to study the ways of the Jedi must start at a young age, at least in the olden days, right? Speaking about Anakin Skywalker, for example, he himself was too old, and he was like 9 or 10 when he
Right.
first joined the Jedi Academy, and he was considered too old. Now, it's known, and it really went into this in Clone Wars TV show, that the Jedi Academy would apprehend these children who were seen to be force sensitive at like almost infancy, and
Right.
they would raise them to study the ways of the force. And it that almost kind of feels wrong. Now, of course, they did it with the parents' permission and stuff, but they take them away from their family, almost similar to how in the sequel trilogy stormtroopers were taken away from their family
Mm-hmm.
to join. They were brainwashed. It's almost like a different form of brainwashing, like peer pressured reverse brainwashing psychology almost.
Do you
And
suppose that that's part of the reason why they want to get them so young is because it's easier to get people on board with your philosophy if you raise them from like the moment they have cognitive ability to only know that way of life?
of course, I mean, think about it when
Yeah.
when a kid is when a baby is learning to talk. If they live in a household that is only English speaking, that's all they're going to learn to speak. And there's some
Mm-hmm.
families that speak bilingually, and they'll learn two languages. So it's when the
Right.
brain's developing the most. And of course, it's just so they can get their ideals in them at a very young age. So it's all they believe,
Hammer it in there.
which could also explain that maybe the ones that fall to the dark side or the Sith are those that did not get found by the
Right.
Jedi and apprehended. Like maybe they're just off world or weren't discovered, almost
Right.
in poverty in the Star Wars world, and just didn't get the attention, you know?
Yeah, and they see the allure of power, and they have no context for um practicing that non-attachment, practicing those things, is staying away from the material essentially.
And this could explain why Anakin failed at being the Jedi he was supposed to be, because he was brought in at a young age. He's already developed his way of looking at the world, and he's already attached to his mother and his way of
Yeah.
life. And he didn't see eye to eye with what the Jedi wanted, which is very clear in Revenge of the Sith.
Right. Oh
And
yeah. Well, in Attack of the Clones too, when he slaughters all of the Tusken Raiders
I hate
after. I mean,
them.
yeah. I not just the men, but the women and the children too.
I can't get enough of those memes. It doesn't matter how many times I see it. Always funny.
Yeah.
But no, you're right.
It will always be funny.
Always.
And on the note of the ranks too, and I know we're gonna kind of walk through them, but
Do it. Do
I
it.
think it's interesting that it it's a title. It's almost self-aggrandizing. It's like something to be proud of almost. It's a hierarchical ranking. I would think as a Jedi that you would consider, if you're practicing only serenity and peace and love for those around you, you wouldn't regard a Padawan learner or a knight as lesser than a member of the council, and yet they demand respect. And every scene that's in the council chamber feels like they're, you know, kind of like looking down on people. It kind of has this sense that they're ganging up, and Anakin has an absolute fucking cow about not being promoted to the rank of master when he's granted a seat on the council, which is just goes to show that those ranks are something to be attached to. And it's also something that, you know, like Mace Windu delivering that, like, you know, you are allowed to sit on this council, but we do not promote you to the rank of master, is not just him, you know, saying, Anakin, you're not ready to be a Jedi master. It's saying you're not as good as us,
Yep. So
which doesn't seem to doesn't line up with what, you know, the core tenets of Jediism to me.
elaborate, because you're getting into what makes the difference between a knight and a master.
Yeah, I mean, like, so, well, and it's I think a master to me would suggest that you have, you exercise and are, you know, exemplary. You're an example of what somebody who follows the principles, you know, what you read at the start of this conversation, they embody that and live that, and therefore sit as a master, and have the respect of their fellow Jedi and the young Jedi that want to be like them in their journey. It's almost like you've achieved enlightenment.
Yeah, yeah, and I like how you said it. It's just the title of it, which is weird.
Yeah.
And so, would you, even though the Jedi Council didn't grant Anakin the rank of master, would you consider Anakin a master?
Yeah, I'm as far as like force abilities and swordsmanship, you
Yeah,
know, Obi-Wan was a master at this time, and he was a formidable opponent, you know, for Obi-Wan. I think he also, he basically bested Mace Windu.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but yeah, as far as like combat and things of that nature, yes. But Anakin continuously throughout the prequel trilogy in its entirety demonstrated that there was something like pompous about him, that like there was something he couldn't let go of to embrace what being a Jedi meant to the Jedi Order. He was like a nonconformist in almost all sense of the ways. You know, when he was a knight, after, you know, and we know now post facto, we didn't know then what kind of, you know, battles he was fighting in the Clone Wars, and that he had taken on a Padawan learner of his own. He, despite all of this, he still had this like arrogance about him, like, Master Windu doesn't understand, and you know, Obi-Wan, you know, he would fall at my hand. Like, it's arrogance
Yeah,
and emotion that ultimately were his downfall.
you're right. Let's continue and talk about Gray Jedi. You know, I know you.
Oh,
Last we talked, you really wanted to elaborate on the whole gray idea, and there's some examples, of course, with like Qui-Gon being one of them. More
yeah,
more recently, I guess Ahsoka Tano.
Ahsoka.
Um, but I don't know. Tell me about your views on the Gray Jedi. I personally don't know too much about it. Haven't looked into it as much, but you know,
I don't know a ton, I would say, but I think it's interesting because I think gray Jedi is almost like the wrong phrase for it. You know, the gray is somebody who is kind of an intermediary. And I think you said it best earlier when you talked about, you know, how Mace Windu harnesses the dark side for the purpose of being. It almost sounded like a better light side user, you know.
right.
um there's that to, it's a part of the balance, and he exists in the light side of the force, but knows how to, with what intention to use abilities from the dark side of the force to defeat people who are evil.
So you saying that
um
Mace Windu is an example of a Gray Jedi?
I think he's like, he's almost like a prototype, but he's still so invested in the culture of the Jedi that he is. I think a gray Jedi, exactly what they do is to not embrace the philosophy as created by people who are force wielders, because Jedi, like we said, is just totally this created religion to, you know, as a philosophy with which to approach the Force. And I think a great and Ahsoka, I mean, we know she's disillusioned with the Jedi. She feels betrayed by the council and by Anakin, or well, not necessarily by Anakin at the time, but she walks away and he can't persuade her back. And then she disappears, and when she comes back, she's a very powerful Force wielder and
Right.
a very powerful I'm hesitant to call her a gray Jedi, because I think using the word Jedi implies that she hadn't walked away from that religion.
Right. Exactly. I went ahead and pulled up the official Lucasfilm definition, and it says the term gray Jedi or gray has two meanings. First, it was used by the Jedi and Sith to describe Force users who wanted to walk the line between the light and the dark sides of the Force without surrendering to the dark side. And second, it describes Jedi who distanced themselves from the Jedi High Council and operated outside the structures of the Jedi Code.
Mm.
So it's kind of meets both these qualifications, and I think Ahsoka is a great example of that, since she was
Yeah.
outside of the council, and uh, we're really kind of getting into that now. Are you up to date with Clone Wars?
No, in fact, I'm like a season behind. I started it
No
late in the
way.
game. Yeah, I didn't really care for it when it first started coming out, and then everybody has been telling me, oh, you've got to kind of look past some of like the fact that it's a kid show, and then you've got to get a few seasons in and it'll make sense. And that's starting to be true. I'm pretty far along. There's Saw Gerrera was recently in it, which was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
it is. It's trying to find its footing at the beginning.
right.
It's not really Clone Wars yet. We're probably where you're at. It gets there
Yeah,
though.
and I'm starting to appreciate that. I really love the storylines that involve Maul and
Yes.
his brother.
Okay, well, I won't talk too any more about the most recent season, but it goes into the gray a little bit with Ahsoka and her journey.
Right, right. I'm looking forward to that. I had heard, I saw some visuals of the Bad Batch, which looked incredible.
Yeah, they were great.
Yeah, which
This Go ahead.
oh, there's a movie with Keanu Reeves called The Bad Batch on Netflix. It's a very dark movie, but
Keanu
I wonder
Reeves.
if it's a homage to that. Um, yeah,
What is it
pretty.
about?
Can't. It's like a dystopian, like it's it's almost Star Warsian, and like that. It's like in a desert, and there's a lot of like Jim Carrey's in it
It
too.
sounds so familiar. I can't.
Dude, it is a fucking gnarly movie. Like don't be eating
It's
when
on
you watch
Netflix.
it. It's on Netflix. It's long too. It's like 4 hours.
Oh God.
But it's like this art film, and dude, I don't even know how to explain it well, but it's a real good movie.
I'm adding it to my list now. I'm gonna check that out. Dude, I wanna wrap it up. We talked a good bit about everything. It was all good
We
stuff.
did.
I wanna. Anything else come to mind while we were talking, like that you just wanna yell out there about this stuff?
Star Wars is the best series of movies ever made, and you're a fool if you think Star Trek's better. Haha.
What's Star Trek?
Never met her. Although J.J. Abrams films were incredible, and also The Wrath of Khan's pretty good. And I've
I've
heard
heard
nothing
the
but good things about Picard. And
I've heard the JJ ones were good. I haven't seen them. I really want to
oh,
though.
you've got even if you're not like super familiar with, I like the original 3 Star Trek movies.
Yeah.
Mostly I like the third one, which is The Wrath of Khan, and that plays a huge part in the J.J. Abrams films. But
Oh no way.
definitely would recommend. And to any Star Wars fans, the J.J. Abrams, if you have a hard time digesting some of the older media of the Star Trek universe like I do, the J.J. Abrams films are very approachable and amazing.
Hell yeah. Well, Zach, let everyone know where they can find you, your podcast, social media, any last minute plugs that you want to throw out there.
All right. Yeah, at Zach Valadon on Instagram, and the podcast again is The Pen the Sword with Zach Valadon, and um, Cage, I guess you were actually recently on the podcast. Now that I come to think about it, so everybody should go listen to that one with Aisa, and that was a fun time. We talked about a lot of good shit.
Well, Zach, thank you so much for jumping on. And to everybody else, also make sure to check out our additional social medias as well. Everything's at Han Talks First or Han Talks First Podcast. Instagram is where you can probably get in touch with me the easiest. I would love to hear your Star Wars story. And go back and listen to the old episode me and Zach did back in the day about the top 10 iconic moments in Star Wars. And of course, he'll be back to discuss more Star Wars because that's what we love to do. So now, somehow, some way, somewhere this week, may the Force be with you.